real reason Hoang Van Hoan betrayed the country and fled to China in 1979. Dear viewers, welcome back to the latest episode of Top Secret. Ladies and gentlemen, what price does one receive for betraying the country? The price to pay is a death sentence in absentia. This program, Top Secret, will tell the story of Hoang Van Hoan, former Politburo member and vice chairman of the National Assembly. In 1979, he defected to China and declared support for China's attack on Vietnam. Hoang Van Hoan triggered our party's internal purge. The pro-China politicians during the 1979-1980 period. What is the secret of Hoang Van Hoan's life? Why did he betray the country? All answers and mysteries will be revealed by Top Secret in today's program. Hoang Van Hoan was born in Queen Lu, Vietnam, with a real name Tran Son Pa. In 1926, he attended a revolutionary training class organized by President Ho Chi Minh in China. In 1930, he joined the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Hoang Van Hoan's contributions to the Vietnamese Communist movement were not as great as he claimed, nor as small as Hanoi spokespersons alleged after he fled to China. As a founding member of the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, he spent a long time living in China. During the resistance war against the French, he held the position of deputy. In 1948, he was assigned the task of establishing the overseas office in Thailand, and later became North Vietnam's first ambassador to China. Although he was the 13th member of the party's Central Committee in 1956 and later entered the Politburo, Hoang was not part of the key leadership group. The highest position he ever held was vice chairman of the National Assembly Standing Committee, and was not included in the powerful secretariat. As a result, his position became more precarious amid fluctuations in Vietnam-China relations. Compared to Trong Chen or Le Duan, those who always maintained their positions, regardless of whether Hanoi was friendly with Beijing or not. Reportedly, thanks to his pro-China stance, Hoang reached the peak of his career in the early 1960s. When North Vietnam temporarily leaned toward China in the Sino-Soviet dispute. In 1963, when Foreign Minister O Ban Kim was replaced by Son Phui, who was more pro-China, Hoang also became head of the party's Central Committee's foreign liaison. But from 1965 to 1966, Soviet-Vietnamese relations began to improve, while tensions between Hanoi and Beijing increased. In this new context, the leadership saw the need to replace both Son Phui and Van Hoan with cadres less associated with Hanoi's previous pro-China policies. Nevertheless, he remained an important figure in Vietnam-China relations. For example, in 1969, he helped complete the prolonged and difficult negotiations on economic aid from China. In May 1973, he conducted secret talks in Beijing on the Cambodia issue. In 1974, Hoang Van Hoan, along with Nguyen Con, a party Central Committee, went to China for medical treatment, but the real purpose might have been related to secret Vietnam-China border negotiations from August to November, which ended in failure. The irreconcilable differences between China and Vietnam over Cambodia and the Paracel Islands made Hoang Van Hoan no longer an effective intermediary. General Secretary Le Duan and his comrades concluded they no longer needed him. His connections with Beijing were now considered a security risk. After the Vietnam War, cadres whom General Secretary Le Duan no longer needed or trusted were gradually replaced. In 1975, the public no longer saw Nguyen Con, and the following year Hoang Van Hoan was removed from the party's Central Committee. In 1979, when Vietnam-Cambodia and Vietnam-China conflicts escalated into war, Mr. Hoang's position became even more precarious. In June, he decided to defect. Under the pretext of going abroad for medical treatment, he disembarked from the plane in Pakistan and went to China, staying there until his death in 1991. At many press conferences, Hoang Van Hoan explained his defection by emphasizing that he had long opposed Le Duan's policies, which he believed had turned Vietnam into a Soviet satellite, led to discrimination against ethnic Chinese, and resulted in the occupation of Cambodia. His accusations were partly based on truth because as early as January 1977, the Communist Party of Vietnam had planned to disband and resettle part of the ethnic Chinese community in remote areas. The 1978 Vietnam-Soviet Treaty was also an important part of the preparation for the counterattack on Cambodia. But on the other hand, Ho Anh and his conservative Chinese side easily overlooked that in 1978, Vietnam still sought to avoid excessive dependence on Moscow by improving Vietnam-ASEAN relations, and even discussed the possibility of joining ASEAN in the future. Ho Anh's defection must have greatly embarrassed the Politburo, as they were accustomed to portraying themselves as a model of unity.
Beijing made the wound even more painful.
2 days after arriving in Beijing, Ho Anh Van Hoan was received by the General Secretary and Defense Minister, and hoped that those who sabotaged Vietnam-China friendship would be crushed, although Vietnam emphasized that Ho Anh Van Hoan's escape was an isolated case. The Politburo knew their policies were not fully supported by the people. In the spring of 1979, the authorities relocated 8,000 ethnic Chinese from Hanoi to new economic zones. Many Vietnamese disagreed when their ethnic Chinese comrades were forced to leave.
Differences also existed within the leadership. In August 1978, Trong Chen and Le Van Luan initially opposed the resolution labeling China as Vietnam's most dangerous enemy.
To decisively eliminate dissenting elements, authorities took harsh measures.
Part of the Hmong and other minority communities had to leave the northern provinces.
At the August session of the Central Committee, the leadership discussed Ho Anh's escape and criticized the security service. Many senior officials like Li Van, former Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade of Chinese origin, were. In January 1980, Minister of Public Security Tran Quoc Ho Anh was forced to retire. Control of the security service was transferred to a newly established committee headed by Le Duc Tho. Xuan Thuy, who had recommended Ho Anh in June, was also demoted. However, the purge was not as large as Ho Anh alleged, and not solely due to Vietnam-China conflict.
First, purges within the party ranks had begun in earlier years, from 1970 to 1975.
About 80,000 party members were expelled, while during 1976 to 1979, the number was 74,000. Second, many people lost their party cards for reasons unrelated to the Vietnam-China conflict.
The expulsion of pro-China individuals peaked from November 1979 to February 1980.
But from March, this process began to slow down, and the campaign's priorities shifted to combating corruption, embezzlement, and criminal activities. In the South, where party members accounted for only 1/3 of the party, leaders planned to remove about 5% of party members, compared to the national average of 3%. This not only showed Hanoi's suspicion of the southern population, but was also an effort to discipline northern cadres, who had abused their power after being appointed to the South. The social, economic, and criminal problems that the Communist Party of Vietnam faced seemed to make them try to limit damage rather than launch a massive political purge. Unemployment and goods shortages led to increased theft and robbery. Authorities had to mobilize the military to guard in Haiphong, but without success. Conversely, a Hungarian diplomat observed that the military was becoming a reserve force of criminals. Without jobs, many demobilized soldiers had to become thieves and robbers. In that situation, the three communist leaders, although they had sentenced Ho Anh Van Hoan to death in absentia in 1980, only wanted to erase his name from public memory, rather than presenting him for public condemnation. And by the time of his death, he had also expired for his host country China.
Because at that time, both Hanoi and Beijing wanted to reconcile, not argue over past events.
Many years after the border war, China and Vietnam normalized their relations. In many political, economic, and cultural fields, following an armed conflict, which was said to be the first between two communist ideological countries. But the story of Ho Anh Van Hoan, former Politburo member,
Vietnam's first ambassador to China,
who fled to China in July
1979, has still not been publicly discussed.
The grandchild of Ho Anh Van Hoan, requesting anonymity for security reasons, has recounted many turbulent details about their fate. Whether true or false, let's just listen and judge for ourselves, ladies and gentlemen.
The Ho Anh grandchild said that Ho Anh had only one son, Ho Anh Nhiat Tan, now over 80 years old, in very poor health,
and due to a recent stroke during Tan, currently cannot hear or speak. Previously, every year Tan requested the state to review the death sentence against his father, but was never accepted. During Mr. Dong's time, meaning Mr. Phan Van Dong, when he was alive, he went to meet. During Mr. Trong Chen's time when he was alive, he also appealed to. Now, those individuals have all passed away, not known who to appeal to. Previously, Mr. Trong Chen and Phan Van Dong promised the family that
they would arrange and propose to the Politburo,
but also said it was very difficult because it involved General Secretary Le Duan.
A drop in the ocean.
He did not comply with the Politburo's decision, which claimed he had lung cancer, and had to fly to Germany for treatment. This grandchild recounted that Hoang believed if he flew to Germany, surely just one dose would end it. Therefore, he decided when arriving in Karachi to find a way to escape into the Chinese embassy, and was taken to China. China successfully performed surgery and he lived another 12 years,
but drop in the ocean. In the book, Hoang also said that his actions would be judged by history,
meaning it would be clear 1,000 years later.
Later, Hoang Nyat Tan wrote a 500 to 600 page book about historical judgment, explaining that his father was a great patriot, but ultimately it was not published.
Still, according to the account, in 1991, when the family was allowed to visit him for 4 consecutive months at Nok Trong Sun area within the mansion compound where Lam Bu once lived.
When he was old and weak and about to pass away, he remained very lucid until the last minute.
Family members took turns caring for him every 2 to 3 days. He asked about the situation of the Soviet Union,
China, Vietnam at that time. He was very lucid,
asked sharp questions, didn't comment but diligently listened. He asked about comparisons between the reforming Soviet Union, the reforming China, and the renovating Vietnam at that time. What similarities and differences?
China's care for him was beyond dispute. At that time,
Jiang Zemin was General Secretary and President, Li Peng was Premier of the State Council. They regarded Hoang as a great friend of the Chinese people. Hoang's funeral was organized as a high-level party and state funeral of China, because he was considered a leader of the Chinese Communist Party. There was no participation from the Vietnamese embassy. According to the account, at that time due to tense bilateral relations, when the family visited Hoang, Vietnamese security always accompanied them. The reason Vietnam agreed to let the family visit was to arrange high-level relations.
Respect for the dead is the ultimate duty. When leaving, the family promised to return.
The family also committed to ensuring they would not engage in any political activities when going to China, as this was purely a family matter. Therefore, there were no issues. Mr. Hoang never gave his family any instructions regarding politics or career. During the same period, Vietnam was preparing to celebrate the 100th anniversary of President Ho Chi Minh's birth. A renowned Vietnamese researcher went to China and requested a direct meeting with Mr. Hoang Van Hoan to learn about President Ho Chi Minh,
specifically to learn about personal life details rather than as a politician.
His grandchild continued the story. At that time, Mr. Hoang had his secretary, who was a former Chinese student of Vietnamese origin who graduated from him and was fluent in both Vietnamese and Chinese, receive him. The secretary later recounted that this researcher intended to ask Mr. Hoang whether it was true that Uncle Ho had illegitimate children. Mr. Hoang told him to return to his country and not ask such irrelevant questions. Mr. Hoang was very discreet. He never casually revealed important matters to anyone. He usually worked only at high levels. Family members just visited and had pleasant conversations, never discussing politics. According to his relative, there was absolutely no such thing as family gatherings discussing this or that matter. Like rumors that Mr. Hoang had an army or radio station. That is distortion. Mr. Hoang did not do that. He was a proper patriot. He did nothing shady.
Mr. Hoang wanted to explain in his book that he still loved the party and the country and wished to live longer to prove that there were betrayers.
But in Vietnam, they either didn't recognize it or misunderstood. It seemed he tried to prove it with data, figures, and evidence supporting his viewpoint.
His grandchild said he had support from China.
They provided several secretaries, an office, and cars for transportation.
Conditions were very good. He countered opinions from the Vietnamese state, many of which called him a traitor or running dog. He proved in his work that he did not betray the people's interests, rather, others had betrayed them.
But he said his case would only be judged 1,000 years later. At that moment, it was difficult. His grandchild added.
He said he fell into trouble and had to leave, which people now call having differing opinions.
He couldn't go to a third country like the Soviet Union because his views were not close to theirs. Indeed, China welcomed Mr. Hoang that way because he was pro-China and beneficial to China at that time. Politics had to be like that. China having him was advantageous to them, but they also nurtured many genuine revolutionary forces for Vietnam. His grandchild commented
regarding the question of whether Vietnam could have avoided the 1979 war with China if
Mr. Ho's views and policies on relations with China had been listened to or somehow reconciled by Vietnam. Mr. Ho's family believed that the situation before was clear. Both the Southwest War and the 1979 war could have been completely avoided. Uncle Ho's policy was for peace after the long war with America. Everyone was exhausted and needed to pacify the people. Avoid war, allow the people to recuperate, and reduce taxes. Mr. Ho strongly opposed and criticized the actions that led to having to launch both war. Mr. Ho's grandchild stated that the relationship between Deng Xiaoping and Hoang Van Ho, both Jiang Zemin and Li Peng were Deng's people. At Hoang Van Ho's funeral, both Jiang Zemin and Li Peng hated their respects. Deng Xiaoping said a read with a very enthusiastic message, praising Mr. Ho. Deng and Hon met very simply because Hon could speak Chinese directly, without an interpreter. Their relationship was very good, both as comrades and as brothers. Regarding the relationship between the two sons, there were rumors of conflict. Accordingly, the father was considered pro-China, while the son Hoang Van Tan was pro-Soviet Russia. Mr. Tan's case was considered a tragedy. Mr. Ho's relative recounted that Tan was a good student and was sent to Russia to study. In Russia, he found the Soviet path appealing and made some statements. Therefore, Mr. Ho called him back to Vietnam, disciplined him with exile for about a year or two, then allowed his reinstatement. Just after reinstatement, while procedures were being done for him to become deputy director of the Mr. Ho left for China, so they pressured his son to leave the party and subjected him to various pressures. It is said that Mr. Tan is still under surveillance to this day. In the family now, only Mr. Tan is monitored daily. The reasons could be fear, suspicion, information, or something similar. In the years 1991, 1992, until 1996, 1997, Mr. Ho's descendants in the family in Hanoi. Wherever they went, at least one security officer followed behind. Now it's more relaxed because they live properly, as good citizens. Family life is very complicated and is a long story with each member having to take care of their own work. One daughter of Mr. Hoang Van Tan, Mr. Ho's biological granddaughter, but had no job. She had to repeatedly request to work at the Institute of Philosophy as a librarian. According to Mr. Ho's family, Mr. Phan Nhu Quang, vice chairman of the Vietnam-China Friendship, had to stand as guarantor for her to get the job, as one cannot just enter state employment without reason. That was right after Mr. Ho passed away, still in 1979. The eldest son of Mr. Hoang Van Tan, a party member, had to leave the military. In the house, there are a few party members, namely Mrs. Tan and the eldest son. There is one daughter-in-law of Mr. Tan who was recently admitted a few years ago. The rest are not party members. As eldest son was removed from the military, Mr. Ho. It might be due to some security reason. There was special attention. Like Mr. Tan being forced out of the party, he had to proactively write a request to leave the party. Economically and financially, those years were very difficult. Everyone had to fend for themselves to survive. But there is one thing I hope know how it is in other families. In our family, Mr. Ho had a very clear moral principle, meaning no one was allowed to depend on him. So everyone had to be self-reliant for a long time. When he left, everyone was fine. Mr. and Mrs. Tan were both state cadres. Later, the children gradually got jobs, with minimum wages to live on. Mrs. Tan, Mr. Ho's daughter-in-law, once worked in the Hon Kian District Party Committee and worked until retirement. When Mr. Ho left, he didn't let anyone in the family know. After that, Mr. Tan was almost arrested, but people thought Mr. Tan knew. In fact, he didn't know and no one knew. If they had known, there would have been trouble immediately. When arriving in Karachi, the capital of Pakistan, even the 3 people accompanying Mr. Ho, bodyguard, secretary, and nurse, didn't know. Mr. Ho's grandchild continued this. At the hotel in Karachi, Mr. Ho went out for a walk. He called a taxi and went to the Chinese embassy. These 3 people were later arrested, and according to accounts, Mr. Ho's secretary group was imprisoned for several. Until today, one thing the family still doesn't understand is why, when China and Vietnam normalized relations, even with the 2 parties and states being more friendly, the Vietnamese states an absentia death sentence against Mr. Ho has not been revoked. It seems last year, when still healthy, Mr. Hoang Van Tan went to the court to request a copy of the in absentia death sentence for his father. The purpose was to use as evidence when presenting to various places, and request the sentence against Mr. Ho be lifted. They were told there was no document. The Supreme Court or any other state court. It seemed related to the Hanoi people. but they said there was no document at all. After that, Mr. Tan stopped pursuing it. Back then, it didn't notify anything about an instantiate death sentence. It was only announced on radio and newspapers, with no notification to the family. As for plans to continue requesting the sentence be revoked in the future,
Only Mr. Tan in the family is doing it. Besides, no one else thinks of doing that.
according to the will, Mr. Ho's ashes were divided into 3 parts. One part was placed at Baogaoshan Cemetery, similar to Liebig Cemetery in Hanoi. That is a cemetery for senior officials of the Chinese Communist Party and state.
There, they have a grave. Every year, they still provide money for at least 2 family members to visit there.
Mr. Hone is placed in a very solid spot. One part of the ashes was taken to Kunming to be scattered at the source of the Red River, because Mr. Hone wanted to return to the country. Still, according to the grandchild's account, one boss, after being kept at home for several years, was brought back to the hometown in Queen Doi Village, Queen Lu District, and
China provided some money to build a relatively decent grave.
Of course, that grave is not as grand as Mr. Ho Tungbao's grave, which the state built very. There are 2 main clans there, the Ho clan, the largest, and next is the Hoang clan. Annually, descendants return here to visit. In the Hoang clan's ancestral house, they do not worship him in his capacity as a Politburo member or deputy chair, but the worship seal only records Mr. Hoang Nagan, the common name of Mr. Hone, as a great patriot. Kei Luan, Mr. Hone's grandchild, mentioned that recently there has been a new development and manifestation, where the Chinese embassy itself informed the family that some images of Mr. Hone from his time in the previous National Assembly, which had been deleted or removed, have now been restored, while the images of Mr. Hone standing next to Mr. Ho have been
What do you think about this grandchild's account? Please comment below to share with Tuyin Mat TV.